Thank you very much. Mohammed Yunus, that's an easy act to follow, isn't it? We'll do our best, won't we? You know, when I first saw this title, Can Cities Really Save the World? I must admit to rather cynically thinking, who would think that cities could save the world? But having been here yesterday and listened to all those wonderful, engaging and absorbing talks, I changed my mind. It is a valid question, and it's one that we're going to address right now. So let me start by asking our guests to introduce themselves, and then we'll proceed with the discussion.
Hi, I'm Greg Lindsay. I'm a senior fellow with the NewCities Foundation, and you've seen enough of me by now.
I'm Patrick Regardh. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm Patrick Regardh. I'm heading up strategic marketing within Ericsson, and that gives me the privilege of looking at some of those long-term developments where we see our technology playing a fundamentally different role in society.
I'm Muzammil, the Mayor of Colombo, Sri Lanka.
Hi, good morning to everyone. I'm Siddhartha Sengupta. I work for the State Bank of India, which is the biggest bank of India. It's a privilege to be here in Jakarta. It's a lovely city, lovely people. Thank you so much for having me on this panel.
So there we have our panel, ladies and gentlemen. We have a banker, we have a mayor, we have a technology guy, and we have a city expert. And Greg, I'd like to start with you. Now, you'd imagine that Greg being our host, he would probably go along with the premise that maybe he even wrote the question, can cities really save our world? But you don't go along with the premise, do you?
Well, no, I'm going to be the skeptic in this. I mean, the questions, we could start tearing this apart. I mean, can the world be saved? But I think, to me, the premise is, what is the city? You know, what are we asking when we're saying, can cities save the world? And I think there's a common trope, and I actually bought into this a bit yesterday in my sort of opening talk here, to think about the world as only half urbanized. Like, this is every urban conference, we have to start from this premise that as of a few years ago, or maybe a decade ago, the world officially became more than half urban, and we're now an urban species. And there's another strain of thought, you know, perhaps Neil Brenner at Harvard has really advanced this notion that the world is effectively fully urbanized, that the rural systems that exist now exist to serve urban populations. And so it's a misnomer to really celebrate the city as this clean, green machine. You know, the notion that the carbon, just focusing on carbon emissions, for example, that the carbon footprint of city dwellers is less than our suburban or rural brethren, you know, when you measure it because of our density of infrastructure and transit and things like this. What we forget in those calculations is, of course, is that we have built the equivalent of the cloud for all of human machinery. So, of course, you know, the cloud itself, with apologies to Patrick here, who's a man who sells switches, you know, that effectively, you know, the Greenpeace has published reports, for example, arguing that the cloud as we know it, you know, by 2020 will have an electrical output greater than Brazil, France, and Germany combined. And this is a massive amount of energy sink that is hidden from us, that is abstracted from us. We don't think about it. And so when we celebrate the ability of our apps to actually coordinate urban systems, you know, the toll of the cloud is not something that's being factored into that calculation. And you know, the writer and thinker Venkatesh Rao has really talked about the notion of the American cloud, that basically we have taken the area between the coasts of the United States, and we now have turned it into a vast feedlot for agribusiness, feedlots for cattle, fracking, where we're generating our natural gas and oil now for energy independence. This is not showing up into our urban calculations, despite the fact that those resources are flowing to urban centers and the coasts and elsewhere. And so we need to start rethinking, I think the city and how to define the city. And rather than think about the city as an island, effectively, you know, that perhaps we should try to retrofit to make, you know, energy independent and clean unto itself, we really need to think about the city as perhaps the delta on a vast river of flows of resources, people, goods, and information. And so that would cause us to change our whole governance, right? If the mayors and the citizens of cities are just that tip of the delta, you know, how can we actually drive policy up that entire, upstream, up the entire river, and actually cause changes at the mouth of it? Because until we do that, we're never going to understand it.
Let's pose the question to the Mayor of Colombo. You are the tip of the delta, and the responsibility lies with you, and the system of governance of cities has to change. It's something that's been alluded to already this morning.
Yeah, I'm very thankful to be here. Well, as a Mayor of Colombo, or if it is a fast, I mean, straight away, if I put you the question, can the cities really save the world? I mean, well, I have seen the population now, as Mr. Mohammed Yunus explained, the rate at which the population is growing up. I mean, and that clearly shows that is going to be a burden on the cities. The people are going to, the tendency is to how fast they want to increase the population, and everybody tends to move in because for various reasons, like the economic factor, the cities are, the employment opportunities, and so when you look at all these factors, can the cities take up this? And it's not an issue for the mayor only. It is a state issue. So the various issues that are coming up in the cities, so we have seen, we demonstrate to the outside the good part of the city. The beautiful part of the city is always been shown. But what about the underserved settlements? The people are unemployed in those areas. The congestions are coming up. Social problems are coming up. So all these factors are especially going up very high.
Right, and certainly it's not solely the responsibility of the mayor, but clearly, as you get more and more millions coming into the cities, clearly the system of governance has to change, doesn't it? What would you say about the system of governance as you look forward? I mean, as somebody who's in your position in, say, 15, 20 years' time, it's probably going to be a very different role, isn't it?
So more and more people are coming into the city. The global pattern is changing, and by 2020, 70% of the population is going to live in the cities. So how are we ready to meet that challenge? Each city, of course, I'm talking about the point of view of underserved, developing countries or underdeveloped countries, but still the cities are not geared to meet those challenges. I mean, I'm finding it so difficult. So how do we get out of this situation? You cannot discourage the people coming from. But the people who are living in the cities by itself doesn't find the facilities and the services to live in.
Right.
So how do we provide additional services, additional facilities?
Sure.
To
And all these questions.
The growing up population is so difficult.
Absolutely, all these questions, and often in these cases we look to the world of finance to try and find solutions, because that's a crucial element in all of this, of course. Siddhartha Sengupta, what's your thought?
Yeah, in fact, I think it's no longer a question whether cities can save the world. It's more of a statement that cities have to save the world. And a slightly different view of from what Professor Yunus just mentioned, that why do we need to have cities? I mean, the question lies in some of the points that he mentioned in his speech. That is how the system is configured, how the world is configured. The world is configured in such a way, rightly or wrongly, that cities are perceived as beacons of opportunity for people who do not live in cities. And I'm not really getting into the debate of what you call urban and rural, because that divide is kind of getting blurred more and more as we go forward. So cities have to save the world, or what we know as cities today have to save the world, because as the mayor very rightly pointed out, more and more people are going to live in cities. More and more people are migrating to cities, migrating away from the rural areas, villages, to the cities. And if you go by the recent reports, the numbers that I have seen, that 40 to 50% of the population of the world are living in cities and around the cities. So cities have to save the world. And how can cities save the world? So I will bring in three concepts out here in terms of three S's. And the first S is sustainability. You need to build sustainable cities, because you also find that there are many, many places around the world where cities are decaying. An example which can be given and which is oftly quoted is Detroit, the city which went bust. Now, that was supposed to be a dream town at one point of time, the Motown, the automobile capital of the world. So sustainability, scalability. You need to have something which is scalable. And the third S is social justice. I mean, I will talk about that later, but I think we heard our earlier speakers talk about inequality. I would say that is very, very important. That's also linked to the sustainability of cities.
Right. The three S is what we need, but how are you going to get them? How are you going to achieve that? That's the nub of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, the sustainability part of it is like, see, when you're going to build cities, it can be looked at in two ways. Like you make cities which are already existent as more habitable, as more scalable, more sustainable, more equal, and you build new cities. And both the cases, you need a huge amount of resources. And that resources, if the governments by themselves are resource starved, so it will not come from the governments just like that. The financial system, if you look at the conventional banking system, they have their own issues about funding infrastructure because banks have asset liability issues. We don't have 20-year money. We have at the most 7 to 10-year money with which you cannot fund 20-year projects. And when you're building cities, when you're talking of infrastructure, you need to look at a 20-year horizon. So there has to be a whole host of actors or players in this market. For example, municipalities. Now, municipalities will have to be enabled, will have to be empowered to raise their own money. And that's where what the mayor mentioned is where your corporate governance of these local bodies come in. Why would investors come and invest money in a municipality in, say, Colombo or Delhi or Jakarta or anywhere? Unless they feel or unless they know and they're sure that they're going to get their return on investment. And they know that this is a body where I can invest money because I'm confident that they're going to use that money properly. So, a whole host of other factors come in when you talk about finance.
Right. In a sense, aren't we just dealing here with a runaway horse? There's something that we're always going to try and play catch up. You can never get ahead of the game. Patrick, what do you think?
First of all, I think that cities obviously needs to be a part of the answer. But I think that we need to recognize that cities, the way which we know them, is not the thing that we're really discussing. When I listened yesterday to the 4 presentations around what works, I think there was a common theme around those 4 presentations, which was really about restructuring, rearranging, finding through the means of technology, possibilities to achieve new levels of, should I say, efficiencies in a broad sense. That created a lot of good social value, but also lots of good business value. And if I would add to that, which was not presented here, but if I would add to that, I would bet if we would ask those companies how they are set up, they are working in a fundamentally different way. So they have much more leaner, much more efficient, much more distributed ways of working, finding resources and competence, not by employing people into huge organization, hierarchical structures, but sort of acquiring those resources on a need basis. And I think that when you look at those properties of technology, and when you look into the future of technology, which is we are not at an end state of what ICT technology, which I'm particularly having in mind, are delivering. We are still at the very early stage. So we will see those powerful technology development that Dr. Janos was talking about coming in and making even greater enablement for development. And when you combine that with young people and the mindset of young people, which is not geared towards the same attributes of status, the same attributes of success, I think young people think very differently on those things, not attached to products in the same way, attached to physical aspects in the same way as we are.
Right, but
I see a city which is very different.
But they'll still be dealing with the legacy that we leave.
Absolutely.
Greg.
Well, I was going to say, I think I'd be curious to know Dr. Yunus's thoughts on this so far, because I feel like we're talking about the sort of legacy cities aspect. I mean, so far I've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about what government services provide, we've talked about financing, and we've talked about technology to some extent. And really, the one thing we're not talking about is, of course, the people and the resources of the people of this. And we're going to make a mistake, and this is going to be a terrible conversation if we only talk about mayors and infrastructure. Cities are not buildings, they're not their governments, they are their people. And so this gets back to, I think, one of the themes that runs through this, and one of the things I'm most interested in, of course, is the ability of, can we actually take the metabolism of cities and make them faster by empowering the people in them, giving them the tools from top down, from government, from technology, everything else, and allowing new bottom-up forms of problem solving, of governance, things to evolve. Because the one advantage that cities have in solving problems over the nation state or other forms of governance is they are smaller and faster. And so therefore they can iterate at faster cycles to solve these problems than any other sort of form of human governance we have. And so this goes back to, without sounding like a broken record, this is why I'm interested in examples that I talked about yesterday, like Urbs for bottom-up construction of homes in informal settlements, the vast informal sector that the world has, that Hernando de Soto and others have been writing about for decades, that we still have not formally recognized. There's tremendous assets and power and capacity in the world that is still not considered part of the formal economy that we haven't really activated yet, and that Dr. Yunus has been doing for decades. And so, the question is, what are the evolving tool sets that we can do to bring that together? How can we find these people? And so that's why I'm very inspired by things like Podemos in Spain right now, and the fact that Ada Colau is working, that suddenly a movement that occupied physical space is now putting people into urban positions of governance to affect change. And that's something that happened in 4 years and could never happen at a nation-state level. So, if I knew the answer to this, I'd be forming my own political movement. But it strikes me that, that really what we need to focus on is how do we actually sort of create new forms of governance, of institutions, of middleware, or whatever metaphor we want to use, that will allow people to actually start experimenting faster and faster and faster and at larger and larger scales.
But isn't the problem that there is just too much homelessness, there are just too many urban poor, too much unemployment? Aren't those issues that have to be dealt with before you can proceed in a way of looking to the future for cities?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I'm saying this as someone who lives in New York City, but I do know that, in terms of absolute measures, we are succeeding at reducing poverty, the Millennium Development Goals, and the fact that, the fact is that, I don't want to fall into this trap by far, but, you have the Ed Glazers and the Stuart Brands of the world arguing that slums are actually machines of hope and that can actually move people out of poverty into the middle class. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that, that from the examples of Urbs and Crit Mumbai and some others that I've read and studied about is that particularly the typologies of informal housing represent a process that allows people to evolve, that allows these neighborhoods and places to evolve and allows these solutions to emerge. The city may not save the world itself, but it's by far the best platform we have for saving the city, or for saving the world, I should say.
It was interesting to see I think it's research from the Cities Alliance talking about urban density, showing that in fact, despite the fact you've got all these millions coming into the cities, the actual density of cities is decreasing because the sprawl is increasing. The Mayor of Colombo, can I ask you, that clearly is not a good environment for city life, is it? And it's not a good platform with which to proceed to the future.
Now, I would like to, before we get engaged, I would like to take it off from Mr. Gupta. Where, you see, my experience as a political appointed mayor, you see, when we have to develop the cities, the most of the populated voting population is living in the underserved settlement areas. You see, we are finding it difficult to take a political stand because we have to face another election whether these people will vote for me or vote for us, our party or not. So you see, the forceful evacuation of these underserved settlement areas has to take place. It is like it or not. The people, unless we move them out, they occupy the most economically viable lands. And coming from here, whether we could set up a bank, a finance, the municipals have, council has a very rich asset base, which can be converted into an economically viable project where the money can be used, reclaim lands, which is set off the development. You see, a structure of that kind, especially in the third world, underdeveloped countries, because we have, the state government doesn't have so much money. Now, the government put up the infrastructure for $10 million to build 3 hotels in the city of Colombo. So what do we do it? We want to have the hotels, the Shangri-La, Hyatt, in the city of Colombo. But the government is prepared to fund $10 million to do the sewer lines, storm water, electricity connections. But I don't get that 10 million to put up the houses for the poor people. You see, so therefore the municipalities have to raise their own funds, whether by form of municipal bonds or by form of a collective funding. I mean, you see, it's a global issue. I mean, but the money will not go. My experience, I'm still struggling for the last 3 years to make this understand, the people to understand this. But the majority population that is living, they will talk about human rights, so many other rights.
Very true.
Right. So this is the serious issue. The people have to be brought, it has to be brought to their notice. They must understand. But I can't just evacuate the people out. Let me put up houses.
If I may, I mean, just 2 points, 2 or 3 points, which the mayor and of course Greg made before this is, one is in terms of you are talking about the most productive part of the city being occupied sometimes by the most underprivileged sections of the community. And that resonates with me coming from India. I see that in many, many cities of the country, especially like you mentioned Mumbai, and I'm not talking of Slumdog Millionaire, which is like a highly romanticized and highly, I'd say glamorized version of what happens in a Mumbai slum. The reality is far worse, and I don't know whether some of you have seen a Mumbai slum. I have, and I can tell you that. So I'm not coming from Slumdog Millionaire, but the fact is that Dharavi, which is the largest slum anywhere in the world, has a GDP which is higher than the nation. Okay, so it is that productive. But again, as you mentioned, is do they have access to organized finance? And the answer is no. They are borrowing money at usurious rates at 3% per month, which is like 36%, which makes some of their products unviable. It's because, the cost of production goes up, it goes through the roof. So, and that brings me to the other point, and that is access to technology. Now, technology by itself is not going to be a savior. We also need to understand that when we talk about technology, we're talking about people, basically people and people's ability to access technology. There is a huge amount, there's a huge digital divide between the technology haves and the technology have-nots in this world. And if you look at the internet penetration of continents like Africa or some parts of Asia, you'd find it's abysmally low even now. Whereas Europe has the highest, I think followed by China and the United States. Even in the United States, which is a financial powerhouse, the most developed and powerful country, even there the internet penetration is not 100%. So, there is still a technology divide, a digital divide between the haves and the have-nots, and that needs to be breached. And that is where the power of money comes in. How do you make these people? I mean, it's just not enough to produce an iPhone and say that this is the best technology gadget that you have. How many people can buy an iPhone? Or can you have a safer, or a cheaper or a less expensive, more accessible version of the iPhone, and so that more people can have it? So that's a question that we need to understand. And the second thing about the politics and the finance, it's a very, very important point that you made, and that is a chicken and egg situation, which I mentioned to you, that municipalities, for example, if they have to raise funds, they have to have a public-private participation. You as an investor sitting in, say, New York or Frankfurt or London, if you are going to invest in a municipality in Colombo and you don't really know what that, animal is like, you need to be totally comfortable, you need to be totally sure that your money is going to get you the return, because you are answerable to your investors. Same thing happens with banks. For example, when I go, even though I'm 58% owned by the government of India, I still have a large investor base. When I go and put money into infrastructure, I'm surely going to look at the viability. So, this chicken and egg situation is how well is that entire place governed? Okay, if it is well governed, money comes in. Sure. Money will come in if it's well governed. So which comes in first? I mean, that is a question then, and an issue that we need to address. And there are no clear-cut answers to that, as I have seen in my experience.
Patrick.
Well, let's come back to the issue around technology. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's not, if I see it from an infrastructure point of view, it's not so much an issue about infrastructure itself, it's more the affordability aspect. And here I think that we need to find and put more energy into creating, should I say, more clever or more workable business models that can address segments of lower income, etc. But I think it's also a matter of literacy, of course, the ability to understand and to use and see the opportunities with this technology, which is not obvious in all cases. And I think that both cultural, behavioral, as well as content-related aspects that limit the usefulness of the technology itself. So I think that those are aspects which are important to work with. But if we look into, if I look into the infrastructure side and look at internet access, I think that by 2020, according to our calculations, 3/4 of the world will have access to internet from an infrastructure point of view. The rest is the affordability and the usage aspect.
The last mile.
The last mile. No, well, the last mile is there. It's actually the device and pay for the service and
Very
also
true.
the usefulness of the services,
Very true.
which is the determining factor.
Greg, perhaps we're wrong to encourage this vision of the city's magic and potential for change, because as we heard a little bit earlier, perhaps we should be looking more towards building rural life again, actually reversing the trend. Is there a way of doing that? Is that a realistic proposal?
I can't believe I'm about to disagree with Dr. Muhammad Yunus on this, but here I am. No, I don't think there's any reversing that tide. I mean, you know, the notion of going back and creating a digital village. I mean, we can talk about McLuhan. You know, Alvin Toffler in the 1970s talked about the digital cottage. The notion of dispersed, rural networks, and I mean, that isn't happening. Urbanization rates continue to soar. I don't think there's anything reversing that. B, I mean, the magic of the city goes back, and again, I'm repeating myself a little bit from yesterday, but I think the thing that's left out of the sort of village model is that again, cities succeed in many ways is because cities have this sort of higher metabolism of learning and interaction, and where we compress social networks in space and time. Cities move faster and think faster, and cities are the font of creativity, innovation, all these things we want to talk about. If we want to talk about saving the world and talk about generating good ideas, this is where it happens in cities. And it doesn't happen so much in villages, and that's because, of course, is that there's less, there's a slower metabolism, there's less good ideas floating around, et cetera, et cetera. And so it behooves
But that's the way it
us-
is at the moment, isn't the idea that you put more investment in and then the people would come?
Well, no, actually. And that I think is a pernicious idea that I've encountered in many places. I mean, the Philippines is one example of this. I mean, they have an insane idea. It's absolute madness to decongest the city when they're referring to Manila. Because it's actually easier for us to understand, rather than investing in public infrastructure to move people through the city, it's actually easier for policymakers there to envision building satellite cities where they will try to move forcibly, carrots or sticks, hundreds of thousands of people out of Manila. This is destructive to Manila. It's destructive to the people who are there. And to the point earlier about sort of Dharavi, I mean, the classic sort of notion of dealing with slums where we will build new housing for the residents of slums is the sort of classic fallacy where in doing so you think of the slum as only a place where people live and not an actual sort of dense set of connections, family, friends, business networks that exist there as well, and that it can simply be moved or torn up and put into new housing. We need to work with the cities we have. We need to intensify them. We need to actually build better infrastructure into them and make them, if they're reactors, we need them to burn hotter and cleaner, not try to reduce them or try to move people out. Just that, this goes back, this is a century old. Ebenezer Howard tried to do this with garden cities in England in the 19th century. I mean, I live in New York. I live in one of the first planned garden communities in New York. Jackson Heights, Queens did not kill Manhattan, as it turned out, either. So I don't think it's actually ever going to work that way. And I do know from reading the history of this, just as one final point is that there's the notion that because of telecommunications, we can now live dispersed and we can interact at scale, at distance, long distances. The whole history of communication shows that we will travel more, that basically our commuting times go up the more we're able to communicate. So, we want to see each other, and that's only really possible face-to-face in cities as well.
Patrick, is that your view too?
Well, generally speaking, yes, but I'm not so sure. I think that there is a possible alternative scenario, which is maybe still the sort of the fallback scenario, or the alternative scenario. It's not the main scenario. But I believe, already since we started to talk about information technology, the dream of distance being eradicated by digital means and not physical meeting has been there, and we haven't seen that materialize yet. But I think that as we are not at the end point of technology, it's too early to judge. We might very well come up with a different relationship with technology, a different mindset in terms of how your sort of individual is represented in the world, that might start to significantly change this. So I wouldn't be totally surprised if we were sitting here, say, 2040, having the same discussion about increasing attractiveness to cities. That's at least a possible scenario, I think.
Oh, right. Can we place a bet on this? I'd love to. It's an Ericsson stock.
If we look to the future, and one thing, a big factor that we have to take into account is the whole issue of climate change as well. Because it's all very well looking ahead and trying to design the way cities are going to be and how it's all going to be laid out. But in the end, if we're talking about potential for sea level rise and a great proportion of city dwellers living along coastlines, and all these grand designs are going to be literally submerged, how do you, Siddhartha, how do you take that on as you look to the future in the world of finance?
Yeah, in fact, again, taking off from what I mentioned earlier, this climate change issue, I mean, cities essentially have to be more environment friendly. In my definition of a smart city, it's not about smart buildings, all concrete and glass, glittering malls and nice boulevards. It's how smart it is in the environment friendly way, how smart it is in a sustainable way. So that is one challenge that we have. And cities, unless you build in incentives or you build in disincentives, cities are going to be built just like this. Just like this. If you go around, and because I look after international banking of State Bank of India, I go around a little bit here and there, large cities where we have our offices, and I see the same picture. They look very nice, they look very impressive, but I always look at them and see this glass and concrete. Look at the carbon footprint. Who's kind of taking a stock of this? And I sometimes get a feeling that no one. So is there a disincentive to build our cities like that? Is there a disincentive to kind of pollute your coastline? There has to be a strong disincentive. Like Greg gave the example of New York. I have worked in New York, and I always tell people that New York is what New York is because of an extremely strong law enforcement. Otherwise, it'll just be a city totally submerged in chaos. If you look at the cultural diversity of New York, there are 102 languages spoken in Queens. So, it is NYPD who says that this is how the city runs. So you need to have that kind of an enforcement, and the governments will have to step in. The financial institutions, for example, today, we talk in terms of carbon credits, but it's a very nascent market. It's a very nascent market. It's still in its infancy. So can we kind of pump up that market? Can we build in more incentives for recycling for banks and financial institutions which are lending money at more competitive rates to these kind of sectors which contribute to building a more environment-friendly city? We need some policy directives, and there are policy imperatives which are required in this. And it will not happen on its own, I can tell you that, because I think the human civilization by its own would break all laws unless somebody came and said that you cannot do it, and if you do it, you are going to get penalized.
Greg,
So that's my point.
Eternally coming back to governance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, and this becomes sort of the whole question, right, is how are we going to evolve this governance? One final point, I don't know if we should open up to audience Q&A. I've been noticing the countdown clock out of the corner of my eye. This is the moderator and me speaking, as always. But the thing to me about governance is that the fact that, the problem I know in the United States, and I think this is elsewhere, and this is a larger abstracted issue, is that political governance and economic governance have become completely misaligned to each other. I mean, we have, you hear every mayor, and I'm sure the Mayor of Colombo would say this too, then we need to think more regionally, which to me, I always hear about the notion of is that the functional definition of the city has gone far beyond municipal boundaries, and there's actually no way to have accountability in these sort of larger regions or to think about these problems at different scales. And there's no way out of that. I mean, I've never seen anyone be able to functionally redo this. I mean, this is why Singapore is held up as a model all the time, because Singapore is the only city with the luxury of having its complete governance stack in one place, in one boundary. Some of the Emirates have this too. But yeah, to me, this is going to be the biggest question about the notion of cities, if cities can save the world. Well, again, like what constitutes the city? New York itself is 8 million people. Our metro region is 18. Our economic footprint as part of the megalopolis of the East Coast is gigantic. And this happens, of course, in every sort of major urban corridor, too. How can we bring these cities together and align them? I'm certainly not a politician, I don't know. And this, to me, is one of the most pernicious sticking points, because until then, you have regions preying on each other. Someone brought up Detroit earlier. I mean, in Detroit, the suburbs of Detroit prey on the city of Detroit. They basically try to suck business and the lifeblood out of the city. Vampire suburbs. I mean, that's the point we've reached there. How do we avoid that scenario happening? There's absolutely nothing built into the U.S. governance framework that can stop that. So I don't know. That to me is I think that, larger than climate change and finance even, is the question of how can we realign governance? And there's really no path in the U.S. Constitution to allow how to do that. I don't know overseas.
Okay. Well, let's throw it open now and see if anybody in the audience has got some questions to pass through. Madam.
I was just hoping you could speak to the rise of a new phenomenon of, or maybe not so new, entrepreneurial urbanism, and the role for developers and special economic zones to step in where governments can no longer or financially support these imperatives of new cities and expansions to cities.
Greg.
Yeah, I'd love to take that one. I mean, SEZs are not exactly new. I mean, it's interesting. SEZs are their own sort of mutant offspring of Peter Hall's sort of temporary autonomous zone, the idea that we would create these zones where you could relax the rules and try out experiments. And it's interesting that idea has come back. I just mentioned Detroit. I mean, Andres Duany, the founder of New Urbanism, now has this concept of lean urbanism, where we essentially want to relax zoning codes and relax building codes even to allow less complex, lightweight, community-financed infrastructure as a way to try to figure out these, to accelerate these cycles of building. I don't know, he hasn't found any takers. And then at the far extreme is, Paul Romer's charter cities, where like literally we'll build Hong Kongs in the middle of Honduras, which of course runs into the governance issues of the fact that, Honduras has a post-coup government. And so, yeah, so I think many people are trying to do this. They're trying to figure out the cycles that led from Hong Kong, from sweatshop city to modern capital finance and trying to accelerate that. I haven't found anyone who's been able to really do that. I mean, I've also read about the commune literature and figuring out ways of doing this too. I don't know, there's no case study that we can look at and say, do this. But yeah, many people are trying. I mean, the SEZ is mutated into the city. I mean, and I don't know, it's fascinating to me from a globalistic standpoint, but from a sense of like bottom-up citizen-led efforts, I haven't found anyone who's really succeeded at the sort of what Peter Hall alluded to in the 70s.
Okay, who's next?
I'm Jose Peñalosa. I am a city planner of a city called Iloilo in the Philippines. The city is led by a mayor who was judged as one of the top 5 mayors in the world. My question is for Greg. It's a clarification, actually. You mentioned earlier about Manila being decongested as a policy by the Philippine government. Can you elaborate more on this? Because, planners from the mid-sized cities in the rest of the cities of the Philippines are into trying to build or rebuild their cities to help decongest Manila, actually.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't want to pour cold water on the efforts of the Philippines' other cities to make them more attractive to residents. I mean, this is the problem you have in the United States, too, of people leaving the secondary cities and leaving them to empty out. So yeah, so I applaud you on that. I mean, to me, it's just a larger question of, is the notion, I've seen this in policymakers, and I've read extent about this and interviewed people, the notion that, that Manila is just intractable. We cannot deal with the megacity, and so therefore we should build satellite cities like, the Green City that is planned to be built by the Bases Authority near Clark International Airport. The notion that we're going to go build a gleaming version of Pudong up here and we'll channel people towards it. And that one being built from scratch, which is, of course, as we know, here being at the New Cities Foundation, is an order of magnitude even more difficult than dealing with sort of expanding the cities we have. So I definitely think we should be upgrading and making the cities, the secondary cities more attractive. It's just, I think it's this idea that we can somehow channel people away from cities or channel them away from the places of the greatest opportunity is both flawed, and also we should be making those places even better places of opportunity. So,
okay. Let's just time for one more question. So, who's going to go for it?
There's one.
One right. Whereabouts?
I see a hand right here.
Okay. Yes, right there. Can we get a microphone across there? The 4th, 5th row back, 6th row back. Thank you. Well spotted.
Thank you. I think city has become the future of city as safe here for human beings. It's quite gloomy, because, for example, Indonesia, Jakarta is about 13 million people at the time, and 8 million people at night, and we are surrounded by surrounding city. So, and in mega city, we get about 38 million people to feed, and we have this ecological footprint which is 3-4 times the area. So I think the carrying capacity of the city is very, very difficult indeed. Then also about the spatial injustice, people in cities are being pushed around because of this capitalistic attitude of the some.
So I'm just going to jump in there because we're just about to run out of time. Could you just give us a question for the panel?
Yes, okay.
The final question.
Do you have the state-of-the-art way of dealing with this? Because otherwise the cities will suck its surrounding natural resources because of the ecological footprint. Thank you very much.
Siddhartha, can I put that to you?
Sorry, what was the question?
I think what you're saying is that do we have the ability, is the state-of-the-art capability there to be able to do what we're trying to achieve with this question?
Yeah, in fact, the answer is, I mean, there's no clear-cut yes/no answer to that. I think it's a journey, it's a process which has started, and what we discussed, it will take a period of time, and it will also depend. You will not have a uniform development in this area across the globe. It will all depend on which part of the world you come from, what are the kind of resources available to the government, what's the kind of political will that the governments in those countries have to kind of build new cities, decongest existing cities, and so on and so forth. So the answer is, there's no clear-cut yes or no answer, but yes, that is a journey, that is a direction that all of us need to take, having assumed that cities have to save the world.
Okay, I think our answer is cities could save the world, maybe. All right, let's thank our panel. Thank you very much indeed.